Alrighty. First of all, is there any questions from Monday? Any clarifications about what we went over? Anything like that before we get started? Okay. So what we're going to do today is emphasize position of our wrist, our radial ulnar joint, and our elbow. And I'm going to do some flashback callbacks to our lower extremity, because two different forms of the same thing. Our upper extremity is a version of our lower, and our lower is a version of our upper for different reasons. This gets us around, and this does work. And no offense to those of you who consistently walk on your hands. Okay. That was a dumb joke. So our ankles and our subtalar are our lower extremities version of the wrist. The reason we don't have a two different forms of flexion is because we don't walk on our hands, right? So for us, it's literally going to be getting into flexion or getting out of flexion, going less into flexion, which is what we call extension. The version of the inversion and eversion is going to be radial non-deviation. But think about it, our feet are at kind of a 90-degree angle in anatomical, so it makes sense you'd have much more gliding within the dorsal bones themselves. Here, everything's kind of straight and lined up, so it makes sense you'd have more articulation of the carpal bones that articulate with the radius and the ulna. Okay. Our elbow and our knee. Well, what do we know about our knee? Flexes and extends, but then we also have this weird rotation that can happen, right? We have a more specialized rotation that happens that is for our radial ulnar joint. And that is because we don't need a little bit to prevent our knee from ripping up every time we cut and plant. We need a lot to reposition our hands so that we could grab things on top or grab things or hold on to things on the bottom. Literally repositioning our hands in a 180-degree window. So we need a specific joint that allows for all of that motion. Okay. All right, positions. So in anatomical position, our thumb, like we talked about, is going to be lateral, right? So for our wrist, anatomical is going to be here. A flexed position from anatomical is going to be in this window of normal range of motion. And where you are down that road, that's why we have goniometers. Flexed 5 degrees, 10 degrees, 15 degrees. So when you do goniometry, it's going to be like 90 degrees of flexion. Like, think about it. 90 degrees from what? You know, like I could have 180 degrees of flexion. So that's what we'll do from anatomical position. I have 90 degrees, or pain when we get to 45 degrees, right? Or pain, if we're going the other way, you could have, 10 degrees of extension from anatomical, 45 degrees of extension from anatomical. So always based off of from anatomical in terms of position. So flexed, extended, anatomical. Flexion to anatomical, flexion from anatomical, extension to anatomical, extension from anatomical. Okay. For our wrist, we also have the deviations: thumb side, pinky side, radial side, ulnar side. Okay. Remember the fact that the thumb is always going to be radial and the pinky is always going to be ulnar. That's why it doesn't matter your radial ulnar joint position. It's always going to follow thumb side or pinky side, regardless. Okay. So deviations of the wrist. Then we get to, so this would be ulnar deviated. This would be radial deviated. There's no rules in human motion that says everything has to match up. You're going to have certain motion more than others because functionally we need it. And what you gain in stability, you lose in mobility. So the more motion you have one way, the more chance you're going to have something go wrong with it. In other words, probably you, or not probably you, that would be statistically not. There's a lot more cases of shoulder injury than hip injury is what I'm trying to get to. Shoulder dislocation, subluxation. Because we do a heck of a lot more motion. Well, how do we get that motion? We got to make the shot socket shorter. We don't have near the ligamentous and muscle. So we have to sacrifice stability for us to be able to move. If you never want to get in a car wreck, don't leave the garage. The more you move, the more chance that mistakes and accidents are going to happen. So my point is that you have a heck of a lot more ALA deviation than radio deviation, and that's okay, because you're going to be doing these kind of functional tasks more than you're going to be doing like these kind of functional tasks. Okay. So they don't have to mirror each other. You don't have to have like, just because the wrist kind of does it, just because, it doesn't mean it has to be done everywhere. Okay. So ALA deviated, radio deviated. Our elbow in anatomical position is extended, very similar to the knee. Same concepts, that in anatomical position, we're at the end of our road, okay? And I think that the knee and the elbow are probably why there's so much miscommunication of hyper. I really do. I've told y'all that before in our first test, but like if the elbow has flexion, extension, and hyperextension, like in other words, extension past anatomical, then it makes sense. Why not flexion, extension, hyperextension? And the answer is this is normal range of motion. Normal range of motion. This is what it's supposed to do. Hyper is beyond normal. Okay. So in an extended position, so if we had a goniometer, we could say 5 degrees of flexion from anatomical, 10, 20, 30, 45. We get to the end of your range of motion, whatever that is. What's really neat, this isn't going to be any test, but I'll try to work in some cool stuff. Sometimes the end of your flexion range of motion is literally like how much, it's never an issue for someone like me, but like a power lifter or someone who's very muscular, we call that a soft end point. In other words, like their flexion may end because literally their tissues are squeezing against each other. At Auburn, when I was working on my doctorate, the guy that was above me, so he was like the senior when I was a junior, and then I became a senior, we had a junior. He was a power lifter, and Chip was huge. Like I used to joke that his earlobes rested on his traps. He had hardly any range of motion. Like he couldn't scratch his back. So like for Chip, his range of motion was limited, but it was because like literally he had these water balloons there that was like limited motion. So his elbow could move more, but literally some stuff was getting in the way of it. Right? Okay. So I wanted to set the precedent on stuff that's comfortable so we could get into something that's less comfortable, radial on the joint. Okay. So for our radial on the joint, anatomical position is supinated. We're in a supinated position. And so it follows the same rules as the elbow being extended and anatomical. In other words, in anatomical position, if I'm face forward, I can't go any more face forward. Like my radius is already facing forward. I can't rotate it any further. Okay. So think about if you were supine and you go from supine to prone, wouldn't that be 180? You go face up, face down, face forward, face back. So that's literally what we have. We have 180 degrees of potential radial joint motion going face forward to face back or face up to face down. Okay, so this would be a fully pronated position. I'm all the way. This would be a supinated position, which is the same as anatomical. And then there's this functional position that's halfway that I need you guys to know called a semi-pronated position. That would be like laying on your side. So facing forward or laying on your back, supine. On your side, semi-prone, and face back or face down, fully pronated. Okay. The reason it's called semi-pronated, I mentioned this on Monday, is because anatomical position is supinated. So to get to that position, we have to have pronation. Right? In other words, we're prone. So it's semi-prone, it's halfway prone. What about landmarks? We use landmarks for our supinated position. Distal radius is lateral to proximal radius. And fully prone, our distal radius is medial to our proximal. Well, I guess you could look at it a couple of ways. The head of the radius is still lateral, but the feet are now medial, right? So whether you want to look at it as literally like the elbow of like the humerus, the distal humerus, that's cool. If you want to keep it to the radius and just say the radial styloid, which is the distal little nub, goes from lateral and now it's medial, doesn't matter to me, but you're wrapping the radius about the ulna, okay? Semi-prone, the landmark that I like to use here is your bicep. Is the middle of your, you know how you have brachial pulse? For the brachial pulse, you have a muscle called the brachialis. You have a muscle called the brachioradial, brachial part of the arm. So the bicep is a good midway, lateral, medial, midway. Does that make sense? Even if I extend lateral, let's see if I could get it on the screen. Lateral, medial, midway. I'll do it over here. Lateral, medial, midway. And remember, each joint, because we analyze motion joint by joint, as long as we don't move the joint that we're analyzing, I can move anything else I want to put that in a position for me to better see it. So in other words, let me try to give an example of what I just said. If I'm here, if my elbow is extended, and I'm like, I see it when it's closer, and I can say, okay, as long as I just move my elbow and I don't move my radial ulnar joint, maybe that's a better way to see that I'm lateral. If I'm midway and I'm having trouble seeing it down here, as long as I don't move my radial ulnar joint, I could just move my elbow. I didn't change my radial ulnar joint position. Does that make sense? Moving my wrist will not affect my radial ulnar joint. Moving my wrist will not affect my elbow joint. Only moving my elbow will affect my elbow. Only moving my radial ulnar will affect my radial ulnar. Okay, so maybe that can help some of you if you're having a tough time seeing. Okay. All right, position. Today is all about position. So what I want you to do is use your, well, I guess it doesn't matter if you're right or left-handed, but scratch your back. Like you got an itch on the top of your back. What position would your radial ulnar joint be? Don't say it, think it, but I don't want someone to say the answer without everybody having a chance to think about it. You scratch your back. One of the things you need to be careful is that when you're up over top of your head, and that was some English for you. If you're trying to bring it back, make sure you don't accidentally rotate it while you do. And that'll happen if you're trying to keep like your palm facing the ceiling or your palm facing your floor. We talked about that on Monday, right? Like if your palm's facing the floor, some students have an instinct to want to keep their palm facing the floor. So they'll actually pronate on their way down and then be like, oh, I must have supinated. Like, okay, so just be careful. All right, when you scratched your back, were you prone or supine? Supine. Good. I feel like Quasimodo from the Hunchback of Notre Dame. See it? And this example was meant for you to try to, a couple things. One is to bring it back to see, or to visualize, okay, how is my thumb relative to my elbow? So here's my thumb. That's the lateral part of my arm. Does that make sense? Lateral and lateral. Okay. Everybody got that one? Okay. What about What about scratching your low back? What if you did like something like this? So I know there's probably a lot of different ways to scratch your low back. So let's do it where your palm is facing out. So like the back part of your hand, the dorsum of your hand is flush. So let's take a look at that. Here's another way to see your position. I think this is a cool trick. Wherever your radial ulnar joint is, because there may be some variability. Maybe someone has different motion, maybe so. A cool way to check your position is to see if you can pronate or supinate from where you're at. Does that make sense? Like, in other words, if you were fully pronated, you wouldn't be able to pronate anymore. If you were fully supinated, you wouldn't be able to supinate anymore. So wherever you're at, if you can move in both directions, then that means you're kind of somewhere in the middle. Does that make any bit of sense? Okay, so give that a try. Scratch your low back. Just so that we have consistency, make the palm of your hand face out and make the dorsum of your hand flush with your back. And then say, hey, can I pronate from here? Can I supinate from here? So like for me, I can do both, right? So I know I'm not all the way, but because I know I'm not supinated, I know I have to be pronated from anatomical position. So in other words, if I asked a question like that, it would be something like, am I fully pronated? Am I in anatomical? Or am I pronated? Like not, in other words, fully would mean I'm all the way at the end of the other road. Anatomical would mean I'm all the way into the other road. And so it would be like one of these, like, in the middle kind of answers. Let me give you another one of those that might be easier than scratching your low back. Let's say we were standing for the Pledge of Allegiance and you had your hand over your heart. Make sure your elbow is down for this example. If your elbow is like super high up, that might affect. We actually talked about on Monday how when you move your shoulder, your radial ulnar joint will kind of move with it. So make sure your elbow is down, okay? Let's do this. Stand up, everybody. We're not doing the pledge. Don't worry about it, even though the pledge is cool. Take a deep breath and just kind of let everything relax. And then from here, put your hand over your heart. So in other words, we have kind of a start position. So try to figure out, just make sure your elbow's down, okay? Elbow up. Try to say, okay, am I fully supinated? Am I fully pronated? Or am I somewhere in the middle? That's kind of the question. Okay, what do y'all think? Yeah, somewhere in the middle, right? Okay, y'all can have a seat. A common mistake for students is they'll say, okay, this is the spoon example. And what they'll do is, as you extend, you'll supinate at the same time to bring it back and be like, oh, I must have been supinated. That's a common mistake. You're here, I don't know why. I think I know why. It's because I think in your head, when you bring your arm down, the palm has to face forward because the palm's facing back, right? But what we don't realize is that my elbow is not in a pure sagittal plane. My elbow isn't like this. My elbow is kind of at an angle. Because if my elbow was like this, I could put my hand over my shoulder. I could put my hand over my heart. So I kind of have to internally rotate my shoulder so that I could get over here. Does that make sense? So I think what students will do is they'll say, okay, if I'm going to lower my hand, I need to see the palm. And so as they extend, they'll supinate and be like, oh, I must have been supinated. Does that make sense? So I think a good trick to determine radial ulnar joint position is wherever you're at, say, can I go from here? Can I go that way? Can I go this way? And if you can't go any further, then you know you're either anatomical or supinated or fully pronated. Make sense? Okay. All right. Let's do some more practice. Before you get to what I would like to do for these, position. Position of the wrist, Position of the elbow, position of the radial. Good. If you were doing it, your fingers would be pointing to your left. Your fingers would be pointing that way. Okay. I don't tell you how to cook in your kitchen, but I would do it because to me it's better practice to kind of see these things. And if more people are doing it, then maybe you don't feel as bad not doing it. Right. So the more people we have doing it, the less weird it feels. Okay. Give that some thought. Don't care about shoulder. We haven't talked about shoulder yet. Wrist, elbow, radial. I'll give you a few seconds. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Do, 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 do. Is any answer have shun at the end of it?
No.
No, good. I didn't give you any motion. It's all position. So it should all be ED stuff, right? All right, to show you how I can ask questions different ways, and don't, guys, I understand that, like, I told a joke to my wife. I was like, I understand, I'm not gonna say the joke because I don't remember the joke, but it made her chuckle. Like, I understand wanting to practice questions. I get it. But I need you to learn concepts so that it doesn't matter what question I ask you. Like, in other words, like in math, there's infinitely many math problems you could ask. But if you know how to count, it doesn't matter which questions you get. You know how to count, subtract, add, you can figure it out. That's what we're doing right here. I'm trying to teach you math so that you can figure out on the test any scenario I give you. Okay? What joints were bilaterally in the same position? I didn't ask you I didn't ask you the position. I just said which joints were bilaterally in the same position. Elbow was in the same position. Good, whatever that was. And was there anything else? Wrist was in the same position. Outstanding. Does that make sense? What wasn't in the same position? The radial ulna joint. Okay. Elbows both flexed. Cool. Wrists both flexed. Cool. Radial ulnar joints, not both in the same position. So we got to figure out who's in what position. Okay. We analyze motion joint by joint. That could include side of the joint, right? My left radial ulnar, my right radial ulnar. So let me just worry about my left. Where is my left? My thumb is medial. That's a quick reference. So this one is prone. If I'm still having trouble, maybe I need to bring my wrist back to anatomical. Still medial. If I'm still having trouble, maybe I need to extend my elbow. Still medial. Does that make sense? So I'm prone here. This one, my thumb is lateral. My thumb is still lateral. My thumb is extralateral. I'm supine. So my left would be prone, bless you, and the right would be supine. Does that make sense? Cool. All right, let's work in some motion, okay, since we're already here. What would happen if you saw this? You want to see it again? Start. We're already established where we're starting. Palms forward. Start. I think this example is a good one to show you that position change is so important because motion happens super fast relative to what our eyes can process. You know, it's not like I'm moving very fast. It's just that there's a reason magicians always have the sleight of hand because our eyes can only process so many frames per second. That means what we see as motion is really just a flip book of still pictures that our brains run in real time. Think about an old movie that's running on a reel. All that is just a series of fixed pictures that we see in sequence and that we perceive as motion. So taking motion as change in position, where were you at? Where did you end up? Is a much more consistent way of seeing motion, inferring motion, proving motion. Okay, one more time. Here to there. Start, finish. Whee! Oh, Lord. Don't get that again. All right, we're good? Okay, let's roll. What didn't move? Elbow. Good. What moved bilaterally? Wrist. What motion did you observe at the wrist? Bilateral wrist extension. Good. Okay. Guys, a lot of things in the body can flex and extend. And so that's why we have to communicate sides, joints, and motion. Bilateral, both sides. Wrist did the motion of extension? Was it from anatomical or to anatomical? Extension from anatomical would look like this. So since we're already flexed, extension would be to anatomical, right? Because we ended up in anatomical. Does that make sense? So we were flexed, we ended home, so we had that extension too, okay? Radioulnar joints. Well, we already established this one's prone, this one's supine. Both of them in this position look about midway to me. Or you could do a quick experiment. Can I pronate from here? Can I supinate from here, right? So in other words, I went from fully prone to semi-prone or somewhere in the middle. And then from here, I was supinated, right, to semi-prone. So I had to have pronation. So does that make sense? My right had pronation and my left had supination. So this is what happened. Wrist extension, left radioulnar joint supination, right radioulnar joint pronation. Cool. Y'all want more practice? Now, guys, we're doing some harder. It's like we're doing a lot of hard examples. There's going to be a couple doozies on the test, but if you've noticed from the first two tests, not every question is going to be a doozy. I mean, some of them are going to be like, I mean, I pull stuff straight from them. So even though we're working on more difficult ones, that's great because that makes the easy, or it should make the easy ones even easier. Okay. All right, let's do this one. Talk to me about position. On this one, my left is on top of my right. My left fingernails point the ceiling. My right fingernails are pointing the floor. Campbell, you said never use global landmarks. I'm just trying to get you to see where I'm at. Okay, I'm not talking about it in terms of position or motion. When we start having those conversations, then we got to keep it inside, right? We got to use local landmarks. So here am I at. Here I am. Establish position. And then once you establish position, I'll change position. And motion is almost proven. Like, again, if I'm west of Lafayette and I take a nap and I wake up east of Lafayette, I know how I had to travel down I-10. It's the same concept. Guys, I can't drive around the Pacific Ocean. I have to go east if I start in Lake Charles and I end up in Brook Ridge, okay? So here's my start position. Establish position. Where am I at? Wrist, elbow, radioulnar. Now, when I say that, I don't mean to infer it. I'm just saying that's our conversation today. Is wrist, elbow, radioulnar. Establish position. Once you establish that position, you see me do this. Okay, I'm trying to get, keep forgetting about the stream. Drum roll. Start, finish. Basically, all I'm doing is putting the right hand on top of the left. Start, finish. Start, finish. Watch, I'm going to do it 10 times really fast. You want to see it again? That was fast, huh? Stupid joke. You go from left hand on top to right hand on top, but you don't break contact. Sandwich. Think about it. I don't ever make you, but I encourage conversation. You talk. After you've given it some thought, you can say, hey, what'd you get? What you got? All right, guys, we got to move. Okay. My left wrist is flexed. My right wrist is extended. My elbows are bilaterally flexed. My right radial ulnar joint is supinated. My left radial ulnar joint is prone. Okay, so we established our positions for the three joints that we're analyzing today. Is there any questions about my starting position? Does that make sense for everybody? Where are they at? Cool. Where did they go? My elbows are still flexed. Now, yeah, insignificant. My elbows are still flexed. My left wrist went from being flexed to being extended, so I had to have left wrist extension. That's how this works. My right wrist went from being extended to being flexed, so I had to have right wrist flexion. My left radial ulnar joint went from being prone to being supine, so I had to have left radial ulnar joint supination. My right radial ulnar joint went from being supine to being prone, so I had to have right radial ulnar joint pronation. You see how this works? Isn't that a whole lot? Like, to me, it would be alleviating that there's a process, not just like, what do you see, right? Like, whoa, that's, joints can only do certain things. So even when you're seeing these crazy combinational things, we might refer to the movement as something, like if you're doing a lift, but in terms of the individual joints that did that something, they have certain rules and they can only do certain things. Cool? All right, let me see if I can remember that last one. Oh yeah, let's say we were doing hammer curls. Okay, now start off, have two dumbbells, and from here, let's see, I'm 25% Wookiee. Are you Star Wars fans? I start off here. That was cheesy. My boys used to like that when they're kids. Now they're just like, Dad, stop. Okay. Start. Finish. Okay, let's do that again. Start. finish. I'm going to do it from the side for you guys in the street. Start position, finish position. Guys, my class is not to teach you how to do stuff. I don't care. Like, not that I don't care, but that's not my job. My job isn't to teach you proper lifting mechanics. My job is to teach you how the joints work, how they move, how to analyze. In fact, some of my best projects is watching people move incorrectly. That's fun. Not for them, but it's fun to help them, right? Because you're trying to help them on their mechanics. You're trying to help them on their motion. So I'm just giving you the ABCs so that you could eventually write beautiful sentences and poetry with kinesiology, okay? So this is not about, you need to keep your here, I don't care. I'm just trying to teach you joints, joint motions, joint positions, and eventually muscles. And then you do it. You go out there and make poetry with it, okay? All right, once again, start, finish, start, finish, start, finish. We're kind of in an inverse relationship between giving you the amount of time you need, which is very important to me, but also being limited to a set amount of time. So in other words, I only have so many examples. The more time I give you, the less examples I could give you. But at the same time, I don't want to rush it because I want you to have time to think about it. So those are the battles that go into my head. Same thing with test questions. Some students are like, we want more test questions. And I'm like, I totally get it. But the more questions I give you, the less time you get to think of each question. So it's like finding that balance. Okay. Did my radial ulnar joints move significantly?
No.
Good. Good. If my radial ulnar joints would have moved significantly, I would have ended like this or like this, right? Am I supine, prone, or somewhere in the middle? Semi, yeah, semi, somewhere in the middle. Right? I can do this and I can do that. When I brought it up, I could do this or I could do that. Right? So I'm kind of still somewhere in the middle. Elbows, I hope we get this one. What did my elbows do? Bilateral flexion, good. Well done on the bilateral. They both flexed. What did the wrist do? Good. Bilateral wrist ulnar deviation. Makes sense? If my wrist wouldn't have ulnar deviated, the dumbbells would be here. Right? And again, I'm not here to tell you you need to. I don't care. I'm seeing if you analyze what I did for this example. Okay, what about this one? Let's stay on the curls. Let's say start. So we're going to start in the same position. We're going to start in the same position, but I'm going to do this. Start, finish. This is actually about my max, so this is a good example. Start, finish. Start, same start position. Finish. Do you like the sound effects, or is that terrifying? That's actually not even sound effects. That's my joints grinding. Guys, does everybody understand that even though in class we're doing like coming ups and starts and finish on the test, I might just reverse it. I mean, I might just be like, I start here and then I'll lower it down, or I start here. You should be able to figure that out, right? Okay, bilateral elbow flexion, cool. Bilateral radial ulnar joint supination, right? And we had two anatomical, right? Like we had supination, two being fully supinated. That has nothing to do with the motion supination, no matter what. What the whole to and from helps us do is when we start doing goniometry and helping us see positions, relative to anatomy. Any questions? Was today helpful? Good. Okay. Friday, I'll send out an email, but I'm going to do a live stream. I have an event out of town, and I don't think it's going to be late, and I'll probably stay there overnight. So I'll do a live stream from my hotel room with you guys, and we'll do some more practice. We'll do, and then next week we're going to do shoulder, and then we have break. And then when we come back, it'll be scapula, emphasis on scapula. And then the week after that, we have you next class. I think that's right. Y'all have a good one.